where I do all my Zoom. I'm like, this is where I spend most of my time. So I'm going to do it from my kitchen.
Mhm.
You're right. I should make it a little more interesting with my cool looking stove, but I won't. Down a little. There we go. So it looks a little more kitchen-y.
Good evening, everybody. We have lots of people expected tonight, so we'll give everyone just a moment to join our program. And we are excited to get started and talk with Mary Beth Albright tonight. So hang tight for just a few minutes and we'll get started. Good evening, and thank you so much for joining the Hudson Library tonight for our virtual author event with journalist Mary Beth Albright. She is joining us tonight for a conversation about her new book, Eat and Flourish: How Food Supports Emotional Well-Being. I know we have a lot of people in our program tonight. If you're new to the Hudson Library, welcome. We're always excited to get new patrons to the library, but if you have not ever attended our virtual programs before, we have an exciting lineup of programs coming up in the next couple months. So I would encourage you to take a look at the library's website at hudsonlibrary.org for all of our upcoming programs. A lot of them are virtual, so you can join us just as you are tonight. But we are excited to start offering some more in-person programs here at the library. So take a look at our upcoming program schedule and we hope to see you there. Well, allow me to introduce our author this evening. Mary Beth Albright is a writer, editor, and executive producer at the Washington Post. She was a project director and subject matter expert for the U.S. Surgeon General, appeared on Food Network, and earned degrees from Johns Hopkins and Georgetown. And as with all of our author programs, if you would like to purchase a copy of Eat and Flourish tonight, we have copies available courtesy of the Learned Owl Bookshop in Hudson. And we will put a link in the chat so you can get your copy tonight. Mary Beth, thank you so much for your time tonight. We are so excited to hear more about your new book, your first book too, right?
Yeah, it is my first book. I'm thrilled to be here. I was Allison. I have extended family in the area, in your area. And when I got the invitation, I could not say no. I'm really, really excited to be here with you.
So we could almost have had this as an in-person program.
I could still come by.
Yeah.
Not tonight, but maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day, we'll figure it out.
Well, we'll get started talking a little bit about you because you have such a diverse background. You were an editor, or you are an editor, writer at the Washington Post, chief of staff and subject matter expert for the U.S. Surgeon General. You're an attorney, restaurant critic, food writer, National Geographic contributor. How did all of these experiences kind of inspire you to write this book about nutrition and emotional well-being?
Yeah, sometimes people say to me, how do I become a food writer? And I always say, well, first you go to law school, which of course is not true, but in my trajectory it was. Well, I have found throughout my career that there are people in every profession who are so deeply involved in that profession that they come out with these like incredible pieces and a lot of research. And what I've been able to do, and what one of the doctors who I worked with very closely on this, Dr. Eric Stice from Stanford University, said to me, the thing that you can really bring to this field right now of food and emotional health is taking bits of science and taking bits of information from all different kinds of fields and bringing them together. So taking the amazing neuroscience that we have right now, taking the bases of human biology and these things that happen in our brain when we eat and when we have pleasure. We did a lot of speaking with pleasure scientists too, which that's a whole different conversation, but it's a great job if you can get it. And so I think that that's the benefit of my diverse education and experience, is that I was able to talk to all these people and bring the science together in Eat and Flourish in a way that I really wanted to both have it scientifically rigorous, because I think it's never been more important now than ever to be rigorous in science, but also something that was like a handbook, right? Like something that you could just look at and be like, okay, how do I eat for my emotional well-being? And that so there's a lot of science in it, but it's also like a lot of practical things, because at the base of it, I'm an eater. I come to this from a food perspective, and the pleasure that food can bring you. And there's a whole lot about that in the book too.
Yeah, and I was going to say that's kind of one thing that was my takeaway from the book, was that while it is based on a scientific evidence, you do a really good job of making the book approachable for the everyday reader. It's not overly scientific that I have to have an advanced degree to understand what you're talking about. And like you said, it's just suggestion. It's very like straightforward suggestions and recipes and menu ideas and things like that to kind of get you on the path to emotional well-being.
Yeah, that's right. And the whole idea that food and mood are related, it's this very ancient idea, of course, right? Let food be thy medicine of Hippocrates. And then you come all the way up to the most recent science that we have, which is, these microscopes that can show that when you eat, for example, omega-3 fatty acids, specifically DEA and DHA and EPA, that they will make your neurons communicate more quickly, that you can actually see this happening in the microscopes. And so it's this sort of age-old advice of, eat whole foods, eat with other people, take a little bit of time to be involved in preparing your food. That kind of advice, but you have the most cutting edge science supporting this. And so that's what's exciting to me, and why this was the right time for the book, because it is my first book. And, I've been doing food writing and for years, and I wasn't, we talked about doing a cookbook, and I didn't, I feel like sometimes you get you can Google meatballs right now and you can get back like 1.5 million recipes, right? But the context and the why am I cooking this? Other than it being delicious, why am I cooking this? Why am I taking the time to do this? And so I really wanted it to be practical, because, cooking's not always relaxing. Sometimes you just got to feed yourself or other people too.
In your book, you talk a lot about having a healthy relationship with food. What do you talk about that a little bit?
Well, look, I mean, for me, I'm building the airplane while I'm flying it when it comes to a healthy relationship with food. And the reason I wrote this book, and the reason that I got so interested in the topic, when I first saw my very first study that came across maybe 15, 20 years ago about the food mood connection, it was really important to me to make sure that we took a look at not just the nutrients, although the nutrients are extraordinarily important, and not just the gut microbiome, although the gut microbiome is extraordinarily important too, and we can talk all about that too, but also taking a look at our the way that we look at food, the way that we interact with food, because I think there's a lot of denial that comes in with food, the sort of idea that like, oh, I'm eating this right now, but I'm not going to eat this ever again. Or I'm having dessert tonight, but for the next week, I'm not going to have dessert, that kind of thing. And so it's this interesting denial that we go through. And what the science shows from the past 20 years is that food and emotions are entwined. They're entwined like vines, and you can't separate them apart. And we can either get to know this connection and make friends with it and try to use it to our advantage, which is what I consider a healthy relationship with food, or, we can deny it and say, it doesn't exist, I'm never going to emotionally eat again, when really we see from the science that all eating is emotional eating.
So basically, we are all emotional eaters.
Absolutely, because our bodies produce hormones and neurotransmitters from those foods that we eat. And every time we eat anything, a carrot stick or a piece of cake or anything, our bodies release dopamine, and that dopamine helps promote bonding with other people. And so that those relationships, to say that we're not emotional eaters, and to sort of relegate it to this, shameful thing, I think denies the power that food can have with our emotions. And to be clear, this is not a message of, and so throw away your antidepressants or so stop seeing your therapist. I mean, food is a tool in the toolbox, in our mental health toolbox. And with what we have going on in our country and in the world today, internationally, we need every tool that we can get our hands on. And so food used to be relegated to sort of complementary and alternative medicine. But the really exciting thing now, and the reason that it was the right time for this book, is because the science has finally gotten to the point where we can really say, look at these peer-reviewed, look at these published studies that show that what you eat affects how you feel, and that how you feel affects how you choose food, and that it's all this just sort of like back and forth loop.
Mm-hmm. What do we know about the relationship between like ultra processed foods and how our brains function? What's the science told us about that?
So I write a lot about ultra high processed foods in the book, and it's really under the inflammation section. And because when you think about inflammation, and inflammation anywhere in our bodies can affect our emotional well-being. And that's because inflammation anywhere, if you cut your finger, it swells, it gets warm, that's blood rushing to it. That's your immune system at work. And that's what inflammation is. And so when that happens, little tiny inflammatory compounds get released into your blood. And we used to think that those compounds couldn't get into your brain because they were separated by the blood-brain barrier, which we used to think was impenetrable. There's all kinds of junk and toxins circulating around in your blood, and you don't want it to get into your brain. And we thought that it was protected. Now we know that barrier is semi-permeable, that it's actually a bunch of cells sort of like tightly woven together. So if you have a small enough molecule, it can get through and into the brain and wreak havoc with your emotional well-being. The connection with ultra high processed foods is that there are foods, and particularly when we eat ultra high processed foods as our regular eating pattern, right? That it's something that is a significant part of our diet every day, that our bodies will respond to those ultra high processed ingredients with inflammation, that our bodies will see that food as a threat. And that inflammation has a lot of different results all around the body, but one of them is these inflammatory compounds that can get into your brain. So that relationship with ultra high processed foods, independent of weight, we're not even like, we love to talk about food and weight, and obviously calories in, calories out, of course, but like what happens inside of your body, what your body does with those calories is very dependent upon a specific body. And so it's really important for us to look at the inflammatory issue as it relates to ultra high processed foods, even separate from weight.
Mm-hmm. Well, you touched on it just briefly, but it's a very large part of your book. You kind of delved into the importance of maintaining a healthy gut. And I feel like gut health is something that we've heard more about lately in the last couple of years. What exactly is a healthy gut, and what do we need to do to get one?
It's so funny. I had a publicist just last week send me something, and Google searches this is not going to be exactly right, but somebody sent me something showing that Google searches internationally increased by like more than 100% for gut health in the past few months. So you're not the only one. Everybody's hearing about this and everybody's thinking about it. The gut microbiome is the collection of trillions of viruses and microbes, bacteria, fungi that exist in your digestive tract. And that's your mouth all the way down to the other end. And a lot of them live specifically in the large intestine, which is what other people call the gut. I think they decided that the colon microbiome just didn't sound as good. So the PR people got to that too. It's the gut microbiome, not the colon microbiome. But it's those microbes are their own individual living beings. I mean, each single one of them is its own entity, is its own being. And those microbes themselves need to eat. And those microbes digest, and those microbes release metabolites, which is just a word for things that your body releases after it eats food, right? All of these things, it is shown, it can be hugely influential over our emotional well-being, and as well as a lot of other things, because your gut microbiome is like a fingerprint, and everyone's is different. No one's is the same, not just of the number that you have, but of the types that you have. And a lot of that is influenced by, I mean, honestly, going way back to whether your mother delivered you by C-section or vaginally, because the microbes that you come in touch with are different. But you can change your gut microbiome. Like, we're born with the genes that we have. There's nothing you can do about it. But the gut microbiome can be changed. And the fastest way to do that, or the most effective way to improve your gut microbiome, is through food. And that is a diversity, because the microbiome is a system, and the strength of any ecosystem is always diversity. And so you're getting more different kinds of foods you eat, plants, fiber, and we can get a lot more into that. But one of the most interesting things that I saw, there was a study that's not directly related to well-being, but to emotional well-being, but that found that Olympic athletes, there was a microbe that was common amongst Olympic athletes that was more effective in breaking down lactic acid. And so when you exercise a lot, or when you're, lifting weights or whatever, your body produces lactic acid. And so is it that, there's a microbe that helps people break down lactic acid? We don't know that this is the reason that they're Olympic athletes. And I'm sure that their training has a lot to do with it, but it's a fascinating new field of study. We do not have all the answers, but we do know that good food can change your gut microbiome for the better.
And of course, emotions greatly affect your gut microbiome too.
Yes.
So if you're having, anxiety or depression, that would also have its effect on the gut microbiome.
Absolutely. So here's some things that affect your gut microbiome: where you live, who you live with, whether you have pets in the house. There are a million, stress, exercise. There are a million things that affect your gut microbiome. And the gut microbiome in turn affects a million things, such as social anxiety. There are a lot of studies about that. Even how we metabolize different medications, right? Like, what one person takes a medication, it works for them, another person does, and it doesn't. Why? Different in every case, but there is evidence that the gut microbiome could be affecting how effective your medication is. Yeah.
You mentioned this about the importance of diversity in your eating, your nutrition plan. I know I'm guilty of it myself. Some of us kind of get in that habit of eating the same things all the time. I know even in if you're doing your grocery shopping now on these apps, it's reorder your favorites. You don't even have to think about what you bought. Yeah, buy it again. And we kind of do fall into that habit of eating the same thing all the time, but that's really not the key to what we should be doing. We should be really diversifying the type of nutrients that we're putting in our body, food we're eating, things like that.
Yeah, and I'm glad you haven't, and somebody's going to ask the question, and it's totally fine, because it's a natural question, but just tell me what I should eat. Give me 3 things I should eat, top 3 things I should eat, right? And I can give you 3 foods that, and if somebody asks this question, I'll answer it, but I can give you foods that are more nutritionally dense, right? That have more nutrients per calorie and that kind of thing. And there are lists of those out there for emotional well-being. The thing is that when you give somebody, and this is just human nature, when you give somebody a list of things to focus on, sometimes, especially when it comes to food, and this goes back to diet culture and that kind of thing, but we get obsessive about it. And it's okay, blueberries. Yes, blueberries are great. No question, blueberries are great. But then people start eating a ton of blueberries every single day for a week, and then wonder why they don't have to throw away their medication, or, eat these walnuts and tomorrow morning you'll feel great, So I feel that, and the reason that we see this is because the study that you're referring to is from the American Gut Project, which is sort of the thing that came after the human genome was mapped, right? Once we knew all the genes and once we mapped the human genome 22 years ago, which is still sort of being mapped, but we won't go into that. We won't go into the weeds with that. But after that was mapped, we, people started looking to these gut microbes, and the American Gut Project found that people who eat 30 plants per week, 30 different plants per week, have a vastly more diverse gut microbiome and better health than people who eat 10 different plants a week. Now, I know these sound like big numbers, but if you think 10 plants a week, it's like apple, orange, banana, wheat, corn, you're already down to 5, lettuce, tomato, it's getting 10 plants a week is actually like pretty common. But to up it to 30, that's what I give a plan in the book for trying to practically get to 30 plants a week, and not every week, that's the thing. It's about a pattern, not perfection.
In your book, you talked about 2 recommendations that something else we've kind of heard more about in the last, I think, few years, the importance of prebiotics and probiotics. What's the difference between the two, and what kind of foods are these in?
Yeah, so probiotics are, the way that I think about it is, excuse me, so you have the microbes that live inside of your gut microbiome, right? And they change, but they live there. They're the workers. Think of your digestive tract as a factory, and the food you put into it is the raw materials. You need workers to do stuff with the raw materials. That's what your microbes are. And they live in the digestive tract. Now, probiotics are foods that you can eat or just with living microbes in them, such as yogurt. Yogurt is the one that people think about all the time. That's probiotic. And you eat them, and they're helpful microbes in that food. And those will go through your digestive tract and help the workers that live there along the way. They won't take up residence, they're food and they'll go through, but they're going to support the workers while they're there. Prebiotics is basically fiber. It's what probiotics eat. And it's what the microbes inside of you eat. And if you don't feed your gut microbiome enough fiber, there is evidence that that those microbes will get hungry and start gnawing away at the walls of your digestive tract, which can make those walls thin and have stuff seeping out into your bloodstream, which is what's known as leaky gut syndrome. And so if you need to get enough fiber, enough of those great, fruits, vegetables, soluble fiber, to make sure that your microbes have enough to eat. So it's a lot of science, but it's also really, really simple.
I like in your book, you talk about, as you said, sometimes cooking, our goal is just to get a meal out on the table for everyone to eat after a long day or whatever. But you talk about sometimes how we can actually use cooking as almost therapeutic for our emotions, like the idea of mindful food preparation. I kind of laugh at this thinking, gosh, sometimes when I am frustrated or sad or whatever, maybe like kneading some bread or grinding or chopping vegetables, maybe that is some kind of like a good release for some of those built up emotions that I'm holding on to.
Yeah, and that's real, because when you get angry, anger is a reaction to any kind of injustice. It can be personal, general, whatever. But when you get angry, your body releases cortisol and it releases adrenaline, because evolutionarily, of course, we needed those hormones to fight things off, to be able to get extra strength or extra speed or get all of our blood to rush to one area, right? So you're left with all of these hormones that your body's not really doing anything with if you're just like, if you're just sitting there in a meeting with your awful boss and, you've got all this cortisol and adrenaline, you're not going to, go around and smack the boss around, but you can go home. And I have a mortar and pestle that is simply for anger, right? Like peppercorns. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy, right? It's just like buy whole peppercorns. It's money saving too. And it's just like that grinding. P.S. You'll also get really delicious freshly ground pepper, like the way that humans have been doing it for a long time. But yeah, I also talk about a concept that is not something that I made up. It's called breaditation. And there are therapists around the country that are using bread kneading as part of meditation, as part of meditative practice. Because when you think about it, that kind of active meditation, so you think of walking meditation, any sort of active meditation it can be incorporated into cooking, as long as you don't have like screaming people at your, at your table. We also want to be aware, as I said, that cooking can be a tool for this. It can also be a real stressor. And so that's why there are some recipes also in the book that are like, here, you just need something. I mean, sometimes you're hungry at a CVS and you need something. And it's sort of like, what do I do when I'm hungry at a CVS? It's all well and lovely to breaditate. But, rubber on the road, what do you do? So there's a lot of that too.
Another thing that you mentioned in the book, the whole idea of using like vitamins and minerals as supplement. You said they should be just that, a supplement. They're not meant to replace a healthy eating plan. We can't just take a pill and I have all of my, my fiber I need. I have everything that I need just by taking a vitamin in the morning. I also need to those are just supplemental to my eating plan.
Yeah, and it's also a reminder that we humans, we love to categorize things, and I include myself in this. You got to love the humans. We love to categorize things. We love to put things in boxes. And so, the idea that vitamins and many minerals are identifiable by name, by letters and numbers, like those are familiar to us, right? And so we feel like we can take a piece of food and deconstruct it into calories and, and the A, B, C, that kind of thing. I always give nuts as an example, that people think that nuts are really high in fat. Indeed, they are. But a lot of nuts also have a high content of vitamin E. Vitamin E is a fat-soluble vitamin. That nut is giving you everything you need to get that nutrient. But we decide that we don't want to eat the nuts because there's too much fat. And then so the system is perfect. We're just not using it. And so I'll give you another example. I spent a lot of time at the end of Long Island, and the fish there is amazing. But sometimes I'm in a place where I can't have a lot of fish for whatever reason. And in those cases, I always take a DHA, an EPA supplement, an omega-3 fatty acid supplement, because as I said, I can see in a microscope the difference between a brain that has enough omega-3s and a brain that is omega-3 deficient, and how quickly they can work and process everything that's happening around us so that we turn those experiences into emotional reactions. And I'm not anti-vitamin in any way, but I'm certainly pro food system.
All right, well, I have probably just one more question for you, and then I think we have lots of audience questions. I'm sure you're eager to ask you some questions. My last question is, as many of us are, we have busy lives. It's, we have full agendas with work and kids and school and families. And sometimes we unfortunately get kind of caught up in that idea of convenience foods, like we're on a tight agenda. What can I get quickly on the table? What do you have some advice for adopting a healthy eating plan in this instance? And also, I know you talk about the benefit of really cooking for ourselves, not having, when we eat out, we don't really know everything that's going into that food, the quality of the ingredients, things like that. So how can we, as busy individuals, how do we incorporate what you're talking about in your book into a busy schedule every day?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And I'm a single mother. So like, I 100% get it, which is why I never wanted to be like, oh, just eat some blueberries and you'll feel better. Or, oh, just, make this bread for your screaming children and it'll be fine. Like life doesn't work that way. And I get that. There are three things I want to talk about that. First of all, for the one of my favorite recipes in there is a sheet pan dinner. And it's one of these things that you can adapt. It's chicken, chickpeas, and then a whole bunch of vegetables. And it's one of these things that you can adapt. If you're feeding vegetarians or vegans, you're going to have roasted chickpeas in the middle of that. If you have meat eaters, you're going to have some chicken on the side. If you don't want any chicken, just take it off and, just make all chickpeas. But the thing about sheet pan dinners is you have one sheet pan. I wish I had my sheet pan is in the oven right now. I store it in there, but you have one pan and everything is on it. And you still get the feeling of having something warm and delicious cooking in your home, because I write the entire first chapter of the book is about pleasure, and the importance of food pleasure and the neuroscience behind how that can affect our emotional well-being. Because I can't even imagine a book that was written that was like, here's how to eat for your emotional well-being. Never eat anything you like ever again. Because that's not it. That makes me feel stressed out just thinking about it, And so we need to figure out ways to increase our own food pleasure. And there's a lot of that in the book. So for example, desserts on round plates taste sweeter than desserts on rectangular plates. There's all kinds of studies showing this. Why? We don't know. There's some sort of mechanism. We don't know what that is yet, but we do know that we can use it to increase our food pleasure no matter what we're eating. So there are lots of little things like that in the book. The last thing I wanted to talk about is something that I write about called the feast paradox. And this is the idea that in America, we think about if you want better health, you got to eat less, right? The feast paradox is that evidence from all over the world shows that when you eat with other people, yes, you eat more food, but people who eat with other people as a regular pattern have better health outcomes, and regardless of what you're eating during that time. And so it is believed that there is that protective effect of having relationships, of being with people, of using that released dopamine to actually bond with the people around you rather than just the television set. Not to pathologize that, every once in a while, I really love a meal in front of the TV, I gotta say, but as a regular eating pattern, it doesn't serve us. And so that's what I wanted to do with the book, is to put out there that there's a different why for all of these, that it's not just eat your fruits and vegetables and you'll lose weight, or eat your fruits and vegetables and have glowing skin or whatever. To me, the real message is, how do we take care of ourselves in 2023? How do I, using the science that we have right now, we don't know everything, we don't know all the mechanisms, but we have a lot of science, and we're not going to have anything in our lifetime that is a pill that allows us to eat a cake and take a pill and make it seem like it never happened. I want that too, so much. But those are some of the things that just came to mind from the busy person perspective.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we'll take some audience questions.
Hey.
Jessica said she loved the book.
Jessica, thank you.
Wondering if you reviewed much of the research of positive psychology as part of your process. The goal of human flourishing is certainly aligned. Your book's tips could be seen as a positive intervention.
Oh, that's really interesting. I would love to know more about that. And I have been talking to, I've gotten a lot of people I'm actually going to write this down because I think it's so interesting, Jessica. I've been talking to a lot of psychologists have gotten in touch with me, and a lot of positive nutritionists and body inclusive exercise therapists and that kind of thing about that it is a positive. It's something that we need to do every day anyway. And I was at a book event on Saturday night, and somebody said, okay, I know you don't want to give me a list, but what is there that I can do? And I just said, eat more vegetables. I'm not even talking about vegetable based or whatever, just eat more vegetables, no matter what. And no matter what you put on them, because it's I think in the same way that we've started to disassociate exercise from weight loss, I feel like we're starting to disassociate vegetables from virtue, right? And if you're going to get pleasure, out of those vegetables, there's got to be something other than just virtue. And there is. The world is filled with amazing vegetables. I don't know what to tell you, like plants, yay. But I appreciate the comment. And yeah, I think positive additions are the key to lifelong change. I mean, I'm not the only one to say that. So thank you.
Two of our audience members have the same question. Can you give an example of ultra processed foods like we talked about? What would be some examples of those?
Yeah, and thank you for asking that. In the book, I talk about there's a scale that exists that is sort of like level 1, basically like very whole food, right? Minimal processing, so like a head of lettuce, that kind of thing. And it goes level 1, 2, 3, and 4. And 4 is where the ultra high processed food is. Those are ingredients that things that are made in large quantities that are made with industrial ingredients. When I used to hear that, when I first started learning about food, like made in large quantities, it's like, who cares? Why does that make a difference? If it's the right ingredients. But the thing is that the bigger scale that you get for creating food, for making a certain food, the more you have to rely on whatever ingredients are available. And that's why when you look at the back of like a bag of chips or something, a lot of time for the large processed ones, the large industrial ones, it'll say like, this kind of oil or this kind of oil, or maybe this kind of oil. And it's because they just buy whatever is cheapest, because they're run by a corporation and the corporation's job is to make money. And no, I have no comments about that. I'm just saying like, that's the system that we live in. And so they're using the least expensive ingredient. Those ingredients as well are created in bulk, like the bulk oils are really difficult for health too. And so so examples of it, industrially processed breads, like you're better off buying a loaf of bread at a bakery than you are buying a loaf of bread that like there's a whole stack of other loaves of bread that look exactly like it that are wrapped in the same wrapping. Chips, cookies, prepackaged cookies, the ones that are, created in bulk. So all of those kinds of things. It's like, even soups. I mean, the ingredients, we look a lot at ingredients, and that's really important, great ingredients. Also looking at the cooking processes and what happens to those ingredients chemically is also really important when it comes to eating for emotional well-being.
Along the lines of these overprocessed foods, Lisa had a comment, and I do recall reading this in the book. You talked about she was surprised about like the veggie based meats, that the meat substitutes are really considered ultra processed foods. Yeah. And sometimes we don't think of them as that way. We think of them as healthier alternatives to meat, but they really are ultra processed. Not all, but I'm sure there are some that are.
Right. Because it doesn't resemble, I mean, that's kind of the whole point of it, is it doesn't resemble what it looked like to begin with, right? And so, yeah, and so that's why I say, just like plants, I mean, and it's great now, you asked about the time saving stuff too. It's great now that at grocery stores, there's so much that's pre-cut, because a lot of times it's like, what is easier to do? Pick up French fries, or, get a potato, cut up the potato, heat the oil. It's just, it's so much easier to get things. And so I feel like don't shy away from like pre-cut vegetables or whatever. Like there's a lot of food snobbery out there that it's like, well, I guess I have to chop everything myself. It's like, no, you don't. You just, yeah. So I got a lot to say about grocery store shopping.
Anne asked, is it also important to include herbs and spices in your eating as well?
Yeah, so there are specific herbs and spices that I talk about in the book that are specifically good for different for emotional well-being. Beyond that, it's really important to have those visible herbs in your food to enjoy them more, because flavor is created in the brain. So if you're talking nutrients, then yes, there are specific herbs and spices. If you're talking flavor, which I think is equally important, then they're also important, because when you have, like, well, let's say that you're doing a recipe and it's like, 1 teaspoon of chopped fresh parsley leaves, and you're in the grocery store and you're standing in front and you're like, God, do I really need to buy this? I got to bring it home. I got to chop it, whatever. You do need to, because when your eyes see the green flecks, your brain will perceive your food as more flavorful and fresher. But then there are also, as I said, separate from that, there's also like cinnamon is incredibly anti-inflammatory. I have, whenever I get a coffee drink and there's milk in it, I always get cinnamon steamed into the milk. You can ask for that, because then like the cinnamon goes all the way through the coffee and it's really delicious. But turmeric is great. Peppers are fantastic. So yeah, it's because they're plants, right?
This is definitely something that we are familiar with here in Northeast Ohio. Can you speak about vitamin D deficiency, which is reportedly common in Northeast Ohio? How do we supplement a D deficiency without taking that supplement?
Ooh, without taking that supplement. Well, first of all, definitely talk to your doctor, right? So about your specific situation, because vitamin D deficiencies can range from severe to moderate and mild, and your reactions, like your reactions, your emotional reactions can differ. For vitamin D, I mean, there's so many things that are enriched with vitamin D now. Milk is an obvious one, but there are so many foods that are enriched with vitamin D right now. And to be honest, that's the only other supplement that I take on a regular basis is vitamin D every day, because it's not just about emotional well-being with that too. There are so many things with your health that are affected by vitamin D, but yeah, they're foods that are enriched with vitamin D are everywhere and important.
Lisa asked regarding the feast paradox.
Yeah.
She commented that she lives alone and eats most of her meals alone. She gets together with friends once or twice a week, but mostly alone. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts on that are like same. I live alone most of the time, and it's hard. And to me, I strive for progress, not perfection. And that's not just me like making up a cool mantra or whatever. That is what the science shows. So if you are right now eating with other people 2 times a week, even if you increase that by 1, even if you, I write a lot about this in the book, that we've conflated, especially because of food television, which I've been on Food Network. So I am one of the culprits, and I am sorry, but we've conflated entertaining with just like being with other people authentically. And so I feel like now we go over to someone's house for dinner and everybody expects like a 4-course meal, because you've got to have it a booze before, your appetizer, right? And it's very important to invite somebody over just for like coffee and a muffin. It doesn't have to be a whole, and you don't even have to cook the muffin. You know what I mean? Like, we think of this as like, well, I can't have somebody over and just like buy a muffin from a store. Like, yes, you can. And the reason I included this in the book is because I think it's vital to start start showing up as we are authentically when we're trying to better our emotional well-being. So I too face this. Sometimes I'll just go into a place and like sit at the communal table just because, just to be around other people while I'm eating. So I get this, and I get that it's not always easy. But just even 1 extra time can be health protective.
And of course, we're coming out of the pandemic where we were very isolated. But in your book, you mentioned that loneliness has risen so much in the US that the Surgeon General has actually declared it an epidemic in America. So it's not something that's unique to certain people. A lot of us are feeling that loneliness, not being with family members, not being around friends and things like that. So hopefully,
Allison, thank you. Yeah, no, you're totally right. Thank you so much for saying that, because I mean, the loneliness is real. It is real.
Mhm.
I feel it sometimes. I don't know anyone who doesn't feel it sometimes. And people who live alone are more susceptible to it. And every time there are surveys taken of one person households in the world, it increases. Every time they take a poll of like, oh, how many people live by themselves, it goes up. And not coincidentally, I don't think, every time they take polls of how many people eat together, that goes down. And other countries have seen this for a while. In Japan, they started writing this into their Department of Health documents, also in Australia. And also in the UK, they have a whole thing called the Big Lunch. And it's like a national movement for people to just eat together, and not saying what to eat, just have people eat together, because it's really important. So hopefully here in the States we'll see that too, and try to incorporate that into something.
yeah. Now, we realize you're not a doctor, but one of our patrons asked, is it possible to repair leaky gut by changing the foods we eat?
I would talk to your doctor about that. Sorry, it's not, I really don't, I really don't want to. There is evidence that yes, but I've seen evidence that it can, but I don't want to say, yes, it can, or, please talk to your doctor about that. But here's the thing, is that there's so much, even that connection between leaky gut and emotional, and just anything that has to do with mood. I don't even want to, that's one of the things, is like, I wrote the book because I wanted to make sure that even if people don't have a diagnosed mental condition, that you can improve your emotional well-being with food, that it's not a dichotomy. It's not sick and well. All of us, most of us fall into like that middle gray area, that it's like, sometimes I feel okay, sometimes not. I got this problem. Sometimes I feel like crap, like that kind of thing. So I absolutely talk to your doctor, but also, I think there's a lot of really hopeful research out there about leaky gut.
We have time for just a couple more. Deborah asked, can you speak to weight loss in foods, as this unfortunately affects one's emotions? Absolutely. Especially when one has difficulty achieving your goal, your weight loss goal.
Okay, I need to take a deep breath, because it's triggering for me. Like, I have grown up my entire life in diet culture. And so, when I first started learning about this, I was like, oh, we've seen so much about how important it is to lose weight and stuff, that there is a lot of human suffering in the world because of weight stigma right now, as we're speaking. This book is about food and emotional well-being. The studies show that you can have significant improvement in emotional well-being through food, independent of weight loss. So even if you don't lose any weight, that you can have these improvements in depressive symptoms, anxiety symptoms. I found that a really freeing message. And it's not that weight has nothing to do with it, because weight can, cause inflammation and other issues. And so I'm not going to, but it feels like we're so steeped in diet culture right now that the message that these changes in you can happen without focusing on weight is extremely important. And on top of that, there was an NIH study. Dietary studies are really hard to do, because short of putting like a webcam on somebody's head and like making sure that you see like every lick of every brownie batter spoon or whatever, it's difficult. So NIH did a study that was a 4-week long study where everybody actually lived at NIH, all the people. And so they knew exactly what those people were eating because they were feeding them and they were like locked up in a room. And eating ultra high processed foods, even when you're eating the exact same things, like a breakfast sandwich that's homemade versus a breakfast sandwich that is ultra high processed from the free, whatever, offered the same amount of calories. People who eat ultra high processed foods eat way more calories. And we don't know why. Is it because when they're offered even the same amount of food, the ultra high processed food is it's such a bomb in your mind, you know, because it's been created to be as delicious as possible. And so do we just overeat just because it's ultra high processed? We don't know, but there is also evidence that just getting rid of ultra high processed foods or limiting them can also reduce calories, if that's something that is in your brain right now.
Now, we have a lot of questions in the Q&A. People have been asking about some of the things we talked about. They just missed the answers. The program is recorded tonight, so you can always go back and listen to it again. Or even better, you can read the book. You can read the book. She talks about all of these things it's honestly amazing that your book is only like under 200 pages because it definitely has so much information in it, but helpful information and easy to understand information too. So
I didn't want it to be like a huge fat book that, you know, you get and it's like, oh, I'm never going to read this. You know, it's like, here's the handbook. Here's what you need to know. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. And again, we have copies available for purchase courtesy the Learned Owl. If you'd like to purchase your copy tonight, the link is in the chat. The last question we'll take today, Brad asked, what can you say about produce that is available today from a supermarket versus produce from a local farm or a farmer's market type of thing?
Yeah. A lot. I can say a lot about it. There are a few things. The diversity that you find at a farmer's market it will help you with adding diversity to your fruits and vegetables. For example, the other day I was at the farmer's market. I found something called kaleette, Kalette, and it's a hybrid between a Brussels sprout and kale. So when you roast it, the Brussels sprout is all like creamy and the kale leaves get crunchy. It's like they're unbelievable. They're so good. So that's under the food pleasure part. Look, there are studies that are cited in the back of the book. The book has a lot of citations in case you want for more reading. There are a lot of studies that show that vegetables 50 years ago had a different, and chickens and all kinds of things had different nutritional profiles than they do now. And a lot of that can be dependent upon soil and soil depletion and how things are farmed, you know, whether crops are rotated through the soil, whether they're cover crops, there are a million things like that. And industrial agriculture generally, this is a blanket statement, and I'm positive there are instances that are different out there, but generally industrial agriculture is concerned with making sure that you maximize profits. Again, they're corporations, that's their job. And so what I can say is that I go to my farmer's market once or twice a week. And I also, as I said, pre-cut vegetables in the grocery store are also amazing and better than nothing and better than no vegetables. So I guess my final thing that I'll say is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. If you can get an extra vegetable in tomorrow, do it. If you can eat with someone, do it. If you can get a little piece of fatty fish, do it. If you can have a little extra vitamin D, do it. You don't have to do everything in the same day. And that's what exhausts people, especially when it comes to food. Because if you go through a day and you feel like I can't have any food pleasure today or tomorrow or next week or the week after, that I think that's going to affect your emotional well-being in a way that you do not like. So that's what I have to say about that.
That's a perfect place to end for the evening. Mary Beth Albright, thank you so much for your time this evening and all of the information you shared with us. her book, Eat and Flourish, came out. I think it was in November.
November
So
29th.
it's been out for a little while. We have it here at the Hudson Library. You can get your copy at the Learned Owl. And thank you all so much for your time tonight. And Mary Beth, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure getting to talk to you and meet you tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks for your time and for your trust. These are two things that are in short supply these days. So I appreciate both of them.
Thank you so much. Have a good night, everybody.